Beneath the rolling hills of England lies a kingdom forgotten by time. The story of Wessex is not merely one of kings and battles you learned in school. It is a land built upon whispers and buried truths. You are about to journey into 20 hidden chronicles, a collection of lost testimonies, unsolved crimes, and enigmatic artifacts that stand to rewrite everything we know about this foundational English realm. These stories stretch from the murky origins of the first Saxon warlords all the way to the dramatic eve of the Norman conquest. You will discover how a king's secret testament could shatter his legacy and why an entire village vanished from the earth without a single witness. By the end of this exploration, you will possess a completely new understanding of the darkness and mystery that forged a nation. What forgotten story do you think is still waiting to be uncovered? The very bedrock of Wessex is cracked with a foundational secret. Our first chronicle begins not with a crown, but with a missing book, the Lost Testament of King Cerdic. The official record, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, offers only the barest of sketches for the man who carved a kingdom from the land. It tells us he arrived with 5 ships, it lists his battles, but it speaks nothing of his heart or his history. The dates themselves are tangled and contradictory, as if the scribes themselves were unsure of the story they were meant to tell. This official silence, however, is filled by a persistent whisper, a legend of another text entirely. It is said that Cerdic himself dictated a personal chronicle, a testament that held the raw, unvarnished truth. This was not a dry list of battles won, but a document containing the true origins of his royal lineage. Did his bloodline stretch back to forgotten heroes, or was his claim something else entirely, something the official history could not accommodate? More tantalizing still were the stories of sacred oaths. This lost testament supposedly detailed the solemn promises Cerdic made with the native Britons, agreements of shared land and mutual protection forged not just by the sword, but by word and ritual. So what became of this foundational document? The most compelling theory suggests it was a victim of its own truth. Later kings of Wessex, building a unified and powerful state, may have seen Cerdic's original agreements as a political inconvenience. A story of conquest is far simpler, far stronger than a story of complicated negotiation and shared power. That original testament, with its messy truths and binding oaths to a people they now ruled, was potentially suppressed, hidden away so that a cleaner, more authoritative legend could take its place. This means the very origin of England's most famous Saxon kingdom is built upon a ghost, a missing first page that would change everything we think we know about how Wessex was truly born. From a missing book, we now turn to a missing battlefield, a victory so monumental its very memory was fought over for centuries. The Battle of Mount Badon stands as a legendary triumph in British folklore, a moment where the relentless Saxon advance was finally and decisively broken. Popular tradition, fueled by later medieval romances, credits a heroic figure we know as King Arthur for this stunning victory. But what if this cornerstone of British legend actually belongs to another people, a people who would become the very Saxons Arthur was said to have defeated? A controversial theory suggests the true force that won the day was not a British king and his knights, but a precursor war banned from the emerging kingdom of Wessex. Imagine the confusion of the chroniclers trying to piece together events from fragmented songs and conflicting reports. They heard of a great battle at a hill, a crushing defeat for the invaders. The natural assumption was that a great British leader had arisen. Yet the descriptions of this phantom host are strangely consistent. They did not fight like the organized Roman legions of British memory. Instead, they were said to have emerged from the misty marshes and deep woods of what would become the Wessex heartland, using the terrain with a predatory familiarity. This was not the defense of a crumbling empire, but the aggressive, calculated strike of a new power testing its strength. The evidence, or rather the profound lack of it, only deepens the mystery. Despite its fame, no one can definitively locate the battlefield of Badon Hill. Archaeologists have found no great burial pits, no scattered hordes of weapons to mark its location. The historical records are just as elusive, brief mentions in monastic chronicles that speak of a great slaughter but leave the combatants frustratingly vague. One such record, however, uses a telling phrase describing the victorious army as a phantom host. This was not a term typically used for an organized British force. It perfectly describes a Saxon warband, a fluid, fast-moving group of warriors who could appear and disappear into the landscape with ghostly efficiency. This chronicle represents one of history's great stolen victories. A foundational moment of Saxon success was likely absorbed into British myth, repurposed to create a hero who stood against the very people who probably won the fight. This speaks volumes about the complex, tangled ethnic identities of early Britain. The lines between Briton and Saxon were not always clear-cut. Alliances shifted, mercenaries changed sides, and cultural identities blurred. The story of Badon Hill, stripped of its Arthurian glamour, reveals a far more interesting truth. It was not a simple story of native versus invader, but a chaotic struggle where the future kingdom of Wessex may have won its first and most important battle, only to have the credit claimed by a phantom of their enemy's making. The waters that once defended Wessex now guard one of its most perplexing secrets. Lying in the thick, dark mud of the Solent Strait is a ghost fleet, a collection of ancient shipwrecks that defy simple explanation. These are not the classic longboats of Saxon legend, nor are they the sleek vessels of the Roman Navy. Their construction is a strange hybrid, a puzzle of overlapping traditions that points to a culture all its own. The timbers are joined with a technique seen in northern waters, yet the hull shapes suggest a knowledge of Mediterranean designs. So what were these unique ships doing in the strategic heart of Wessex's coastline? One compelling theory paints a picture of profound ritual. Perhaps this was a ceremonial fleet, deliberately scuttled as an offering to a forgotten sea god or a powerful ancestral spirit. The act of sinking such valuable vessels would have been a staggering display of devotion, a sacrifice for protection on the treacherous seas or in gratitude for a great victory. Alternatively, the graveyard might mark the site of a terrible naval defeat. Could these be the remains of a rival kingdom's invasion force, lured into the tricky currents of the Solent and destroyed by the defending ships of Wessex? The strategic location makes this a chilling possibility, a watery tomb for a forgotten army. Yet another idea suggests a more tragic, gradual end. These may have been the trading ships of a prosperous coastal settlement, a town that now lies submerged beneath the waves after the land slowly sank or sea levels rose. The ships moored in their home harbor were simply swallowed by the advancing sea, abandoned where they lay. The most haunting clues, however, are not the ships themselves, but the small, personal items left behind. A finely carved wooden comb lost between the deck planks speaks of a sailor's care for his appearance. The charred remnants of a cooking pot hint at meals shared during long voyages. A single child's leather shoe found nestled in the bilge of one vessel raises a heartbreaking question. Was this a family's most cherished possession, brought on a journey to a new home, or did a child actually live and work aboard this mysterious ship? These objects are silent witnesses, transforming these enigmatic wrecks from archaeological curiosities into the graves of real, breathing people whose stories are forever lost to the tides. Deep within the royal seat of Wessex, a spiritual poison threatened to unravel the kingdom from its core. The legend of the Winchester Codex tells of a book that was never meant to be. It was not a chronicle of battles, but a weapon of ideas smuggled past pious guards into the very heart of the king's court. Imagine the scene: a devout king, a man who built churches and consulted with bishops, suddenly presented with a text that challenged the very foundation of his God-given right to rule. This was no ordinary gospel. The Codex was said to be a heretical work, a fusion of ancient Greek philosophy and radical Christian thought that proposed a terrifying idea. It argued that a king was not God's appointed representative on earth, but merely a man, a temporary custodian of power whose authority came from the consent of the people he ruled. In an age where the church and crown were twin pillars holding up society, this idea was more dangerous than any invading army. It was a spark that could ignite a rebellion of the mind. The reaction was swift and silent. There could be no public trial, no announcement that such a dangerous text had ever breached the palace walls. Instead, a secret inquisition was launched within the royal household itself. Trusted courtiers and frightened clerics were quietly questioned. The king's own confessor may have been involved, searching for the source of this intellectual contagion. The goal was not just to find the book, but to erase its very memory, to ensure its radical notions of conditional kingship died with the parchment they were written on. So what was the final fate of the Winchester Codex? Some accounts claim it was taken to a secluded courtyard and burned in a small, private fire, its ashes scattered to the wind so no fragment of its heresy could survive. Others whisper that it was never destroyed, merely hidden. They say it was sealed within a lead case and walled up in the crypt of the Old Minster, lying beneath the very stones of the church that condemned it, a silent, sleeping threat. The most tantalizing possibility is that it survived the purge. A sympathetic noble, understanding the book's profound value, could have smuggled it out and into a private library where it remains to this day, an unreadable secret passed down through generations. The survival of the Codex would force us to completely rethink the origins of English Christianity. It would prove that the intellectual currents of 7th century Wessex were not a simple river of orthodox belief, but a turbulent sea of debate and dissent. The struggle for the soul of a kingdom was not just fought with swords on a battlefield, but with ideas in the shadowy corridors of power, a conflict whose outcome was far from certain. The struggle over ideas in Winchester was a silent war, but the next chronicle reveals a silence of an entirely different kind. There is a village in Wessex that simply stopped speaking its name. The Domesday Book, that great census commissioned by William the Conqueror, coldly lists the settlement of Wistone. It records its fields, its livestock, and the taxes it paid. And then, by the 12th century, it is gone. Not a single map, charter, or court roll mentions Wistone ever again. It did not fall to a recorded plague. It was not burned in a known war. It simply vanished from the earth as if it had never been. Local folklore, passed down for generations, provides a chilling explanation. The story tells of a vengeful Celtic druid, one of the old guardians of the land. The people of Wistone, in their need for timber and farmland, committed an unforgivable sacrilege. They cut down his sacred grove, a circle of ancient oaks that had stood since time out of memory. In his fury, the druid laid a curse upon the village, not of fire and sword, but of utter erasure. He promised that the name of Wistone would be forgotten, its footprint on the land smoothed over by nature itself. This is more than just a scary story. It speaks to a deep cultural memory of a time when the landscape itself was considered alive and divine, and to offend it was to risk annihilation. Modern archaeology has tried to solve the riddle with science, yet the ground itself seems to hold the secret. Repeated surveys of the suspected area have found nothing conclusive. There are no clear foundation stones for a church, no distinct outlines of a village green, no midden heaps filled with domestic refuse. It is as if the earth swallowed every last posthole and pottery shard. This profound lack of evidence has spawned more rational, yet equally mysterious theories. Perhaps the soil of Wistone was simply farmed to exhaustion. After generations of use, the land could no longer yield enough to feed the village, forcing a slow, desperate dispersal of its people. Another idea suggests a localized pandemic, a swift and terrible sickness that left no survivors to tell the tale and which official records, focused on larger towns, simply missed. The most intriguing theory involves human agency. Could the local lord have orchestrated a mass migration? Perhaps he needed the population for a new planned town elsewhere, or maybe he wanted to enclose the land for his own sheep pastures, a common practice later in history. He would have simply moved the entire village, and in a generation or two, the memory of the old location, the original Wistone, faded into nothing. This means the village was not destroyed, but deliberately forgotten. The truth of Wistone's silence is a hole in history, a community that slipped through the cracks of time, leaving behind only a tax record and a ghost story. A crown of antler and bronze, woven with gold and amber, represents a kingship forgotten by history. This is the legendary crown of the Summer King, a title that echoes from the oldest fragments of Wessex poetry. It speaks not of a hereditary ruler, but of a temporary monarch chosen for a single, sacred purpose. At the height of the summer solstice, when the sun hung longest in the sky, a man would be crowned. His reign was brief, lasting only until the first harvest, and his power was not political but profoundly spiritual. He was a living sacrifice to the land itself, a human conduit whose vitality was believed to flow directly into the soil, ensuring the fertility of the crops and the prosperity of the people for the coming year. The poetry describes his processions through fields of young grain, his touch upon the soil, his very presence a kind of magic. The crown itself was the engine of this ritual. The antlers, shed and regrown each year, symbolized the endless cycle of death and rebirth in nature. The bronze bands represented the strength and permanence of the sun. The amber, glowing like captured sunlight, was thought to hold the very essence of the life-giving star. To wear this crown was to become one with the forces of creation, to take the weight of the community's survival upon your own head. So what happened to this potent symbol of a pagan past? The most fascinating theory involves none other than King Alfred the Great. Faced with the immense task of uniting a fractured kingdom against the Viking onslaught, Alfred understood that he needed to bind together not just armies but hearts. His kingdom was a patchwork of old pagan families and new Christian converts. The story goes that Alfred, a deeply pious Christian, also recognized the power of ancient tradition. He could not eradicate the deep-seated belief in the Summer King, so he sought to transform it. It is whispered that he did not destroy the crown, but had it hidden away in a place of great secrecy. His plan was not to suppress the old ways, but to absorb their power, to reframe the ritual of the king who serves the land as a precursor to the Christian king who serves God and his people. The crown became a secret bridge between two worlds. The search for its resting place has consumed antiquarians for centuries. Some believe it lies in a barrow mound overlooking the Great Stone Circle at Stonehenge, a site deeply connected to solar cycles. Others argue it was concealed within the foundations of one of Alfred's own fortified towns, a pagan heart buried at the center of his Christian kingdom. A few even speculate it was given to the church for safekeeping, walled up in the crypt of a cathedral where it remains, a silent, slumbering king waiting for the sun to call him again. To find this crown would be to touch the very moment a kingdom's soul was remade, a tangible link to the time when the fate of the harvest and the king were one and the same. The crown of the Summer King symbolized a pact with the land, but another king chose to encode his legacy in a different kind of mystery. King Athelstan, the grandson of Alfred the Great, and the first man to truly call himself King of all England, was a ruler of immense power and profound intellect. His court was a center of learning, yet he left behind a puzzle that has defied centuries of interpretation. Scattered across the sites of his former palaces, from Winchester to Malmesbury, are stones carved not with royal proclamations but with cryptic riddles. One of the most famous is etched into a lintel stone, its words worn smooth by time. It reads, "The hart drinks where the fox fears to tread, and the moon's twin guards the crown's true bed." This is no idle wordplay. The hart or stag was a known symbol of the royal house of Wessex. The fox could represent a cunning rival, perhaps a Viking leader or a disloyal ealdorman. The phrase suggests a secret location, a water source perhaps, that is safe for the king but perilous for his enemies. The second line is even more compelling. The moon's twin could refer to a pair of hills or to two lakes that reflect the moonlight. The crown's true bed would then be the hiding place for Athelstan's own crown, a treasure of immense symbolic value he wished to protect from potential usurpers or invaders. Another riddle found on a stone step is more political. It states, "Iron from the west binds the word from the north, but the serpent's tooth unlocks the door." This could be a coded reference to a secret alliance. Iron from the west might signify the military support of the Welsh kings Athelstan subdued. The word from the north could be a treaty with the Scots. The binding of these two forces would have been a masterstroke of diplomacy, securing his northern frontier. The serpent's tooth, however, is the key. It might be a personal sigil, a token given to a trusted courier that would authenticate a message and unlock the terms of this hidden agreement. These were almost certainly not a king's mere amusement. In an age without secure documents or digital codes, a riddle carved in stone was a brilliant, durable solution. It was a way to record the locations of royal treasure hoards, emergency funds meant to finance a kingdom in crisis. More importantly, it was a method for passing sensitive state secrets to a chosen successor without the risk of a scroll being intercepted. Only someone with the specific knowledge of the king's mind, his personal symbols, and his understanding of the landscape could possibly decipher the true meaning. The fact that these stones remain unsolved tells us they worked perfectly. They protected their secrets through invasions, civil wars, and the slow erosion of time. Modern codebreakers and historians, armed with computers and linguistic analysis, have tried to crack Athelstan's code. They map the locations, cross-reference ancient place names, and study his charters for clues. Yet the stones keep their silence. Were they instructions for a hidden network of loyalists? Did they point to the resting place of a holy relic, like the legendary crown of thorns that Athelstan was said to possess? Or were they a final, grand lesson from a scholarly king, testing the wit of those who would come after him, ensuring that only the most worthy could ever access the deepest truths of his reign? The Athelstan riddle is more than a treasure hunt. It is the ghost of a king's most private thoughts whispering from the stone. A king's riddle carved in stone speaks of a heart, but one particular stag was far more than a symbol. The White Hart of Wessex was a living legend, a creature of such stunning purity that its appearance was never considered a mere accident of nature. This was no ordinary animal. Chronicles wrote that a brilliant white stag with antlers like bleached bone would manifest at pivotal moments. It was seen on the eve of a great battle, standing silently at the edge of a forest as the war councils met. It was glimpsed just before a king took his final breath, as if waiting to escort his soul. And it was always present when a new ruler was crowned, a silent, living witness to the sacred transfer of power. The common belief is that this was a powerful symbol of divine favor, a sign from God that the king held a sacred right to rule. But what if the truth was far more tangible and far more strange? A compelling theory suggests the White Hart was not a miraculous apparition, but a carefully guarded bloodline. Albino stags are incredibly rare, a genetic fluke. For one to appear so reliably at such precise moments defies all probability. This points to a secret and sophisticated breeding program managed by a dedicated line of royal foresters sworn to absolute secrecy. These men would have tracked the herds in the vast royal hunting preserves, isolating animals that carried the recessive trait for white coats and ensuring they were bred to preserve and strengthen that lineage. The appearance of the stag was then not a matter of chance, but of deliberate staging. The animal would be brought from its hidden enclosure to a predetermined location, released just in time to be discovered by the king or his retinue. This was a masterful piece of political theater, using a living creature to provide a heaven-sent endorsement at the exact moment it was needed most. The Hart's bloodline was therefore as sacred as the king's own. Its vitality was directly tied to the health of the realm. If the stag thrived, so did Wessex. If it were to die or be lost, it would signal a catastrophic end to the royal house's legitimacy. This brings us to the final, haunting chapter of the story. Persistent rumors claim that the last known White Hart was secretly kept during the reign of Edward the Confessor, a gentle king whose death without an heir plunged England into crisis. As William the Conqueror's army marched inland, what became of this living emblem of Saxon rule? The Normans would have certainly hunted it down as a symbol of the old order, a trophy to prove their divine right had superseded the old. Yet there is no record of such a triumphant kill. No Norman nobleman ever claimed to have taken the legendary white stag, so where did it go? One account says the royal foresters, foreseeing the fall of their world, led the animal on a desperate moonlit journey. They supposedly guided it deep into the wildest, most impenetrable woods of the Wessex heartland, a place the new Norman lords would never find. There, they released it to live out its days in freedom, its sacred bloodline fading back into the wild deer from which it came. Another, more tragic tale whispers that the stag was never freed. It was quietly put down by its own keepers, a final, merciful act to prevent its capture and desecration. They buried it in an unmarked forest grave, its location dying with them. The mystery of the White Hart's fate is the mystery of Wessex itself. Its disappearance mirrors the extinction of the direct Saxon royal line, a silent, sorrowful echo of a kingdom that vanished, leaving only a ghost story in the trees. A merchant's secret was sealed in a Southampton cellar for centuries, a discovery that challenges our entire timeline of exploration. Among the personal effects of a wealthy Wessex trader, found with his ledgers and sealed wine jars, was a map drawn on carefully treated sheepskin. It charts the familiar trading ports of Francia and Frisia, but then the ink lines dare to travel farther, stretching west across the open ocean to sketch a rugged, unfamiliar coastline labeled as the Western Wood. This landmass bears a startling resemblance to the northeastern shores of North America. The map itself is the heart of the mystery. The sheepskin has been carbon dated to the late 8th century, a full 200 years before Leif Erikson's voyage. The inks are consistent with those used in Saxon scriptoria, and the handwriting is an expert, flowing insular minuscule, the script of a highly educated man. The coastlines are not perfectly accurate by modern standards, yet they show distinct features like a great curved bay and a long, pointed peninsula that align eerily well with parts of Newfoundland. Could a Saxon merchant have truly known of this land? The academic world is bitterly divided. Skeptics argue the map is an elaborate, if ancient, forgery. They suggest the merchant was a clever fraudster who invented a new trade route to attract investors to a doomed expedition. Or perhaps he was simply a dreamer illustrating travelers' tales he had heard from Norse scouts. They point to a few perceived inaccuracies in the charting of the British Isles as proof of its unreliability, but its defenders present a powerful counter-argument. They note that the prevailing currents of the North Atlantic form a natural conveyor belt. A Saxon nar, a sturdy trading vessel, blown off course on a return trip from the Rhineland, could have been carried by these currents directly to the shores of the New World. The map includes annotations in a cryptic shorthand, notes that seem to record sailing times, prevailing winds, and even a sketch of a distinctive star pattern visible only in the Northern Hemisphere. This is not the work of a fantasist, it is the meticulous record of a navigator. The most compelling detail is a small, carefully drawn symbol of a cross next to a river inlet on the Western Wood. This was not the typical cross of a Christian settlement, but a specific, not-work design known to be used by a small, isolated sect of Saxon monks. Were these men seeking utter solitude, sailing into the unknown to found a hermitage at the edge of the world? the merchant's secret was not the land itself, but the route to it. His wealth may not have come from English wool and Frankish wine alone, but from a monopoly on goods from a continent no one else knew existed. His map was his most treasured possession, not because it was a fantasy, but because it was a reality so profound its revelation would have shattered the known world. Did he ever make the voyage himself, or did he acquire this knowledge from a lone, shipwrecked sailor, buying the man's silence with gold and preserving his incredible story on a sheet of parchment? We are left with a haunting possibility that Saxon ships may have glimpsed the pine-clad shores of America, casting shadows on a beach where no European would stand again for centuries. The power of a king's symbol could be manipulated, but the visions of a saint were said to come directly from God. Our 10th chronicle delves into the Dunstan prophecies, a collection of secret writings attributed to one of the most formidable figures in English history. Saint Dunstan, the Archbishop of Canterbury, born in the heart of Wessex, was renowned for his iron will in reforming the church and his deep piety. But behind the public image of a sober administrator, a far more mysterious figure emerges from scattered manuscripts. These texts claim Dunstan was plagued by vivid, waking visions, divine dreams that showed him the long arc of England's destiny with terrifying clarity. He reportedly foresaw a great conquest from across the sea, a detailed prophecy of the Norman invasion that included the specific design of the motte and bailey castles William would build to subdue the land. He described a great pestilence that would leave fields empty and villages silent, a clear allusion to the Black Death centuries before it arrived. Most shocking of all, he supposedly saw the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, a vision of holy houses being stripped of their wealth and their very stones torn down. The accuracy of these predictions, as recorded by later scribes, was precisely why they had to be silenced. For the medieval church, which held a monopoly on interpreting God's will, such precise and verifiable prophecies were profoundly destabilizing. If a man could see the future so clearly, it challenged the entire concept of divine mystery and the church's role as its sole guide. How could priests offer comfort and authority if the coming centuries of turmoil were already mapped out? The prophecies were not just inconvenient, they were heretical in their implications, suggesting a fixed fate that even prayer could not alter. The suppression was swift and thorough. Official church records make no mention of them. Copies were sought out and burned, and any monk caught transcribing the visions risked excommunication. The prophecies were driven underground, surviving only in fragments hidden inside the bindings of other books or passed orally in coded language among certain mystical orders. The modern search for Dunstan's original manuscripts has become a scholarly grail quest. Researchers now use spectral imaging on old monastic ledgers, hoping to find palimpsests, texts that were scraped away and written over but which might still hold the ghost of the original words. They scour private collections that escaped the systematic purges of the Tudor era, looking for a forgotten codex that might contain the unedited visions. This search raises a profound ethical dilemma that echoes into our own time. If such a manuscript were found and authenticated, should its contents be made public? Would revealing a 1,000-year-old prophecy of future events, even those that have already passed for us, cause unnecessary panic or social unrest? Could such a document be weaponized, its words twisted to serve modern political or ideological ends? Or does humanity have a right to know, to see a possible roadmap of challenges yet to come, from climate crises to geopolitical shifts, all seen through the eyes of a 10th century saint? The Dunstan prophecies are more than a historical curiosity. They are a locked box from the past, and we are still wrestling with whether we possess the wisdom to turn the key. Power rarely sits only on the throne. In the shadows of the great cathedral at Sherborne, a different kind of authority was said to gather. During the turbulent 10th century, as kings rose and fell, a clandestine group of nobles and bishops formed a secret assembly that pulled the strings of the kingdom from behind the curtain of history. This was the Shadow Council of Sherborne, a name whispered in the margins of obscure monastic chronicles that speak of coded messages and midnight meetings. Their influence was not recorded in the official charters, but in the strange and sudden shifts of royal policy, in the unexpected rise of one heir and the quiet disappearance of another. They operated through a network of trusted messengers who carried seemingly innocent letters. A mention of the price of wool might signal the need for a meeting, while a complaint about a poor harvest could be a coded alert about a rival lord's movements. Their gathering places were chosen for both secrecy and sanctity. They met in the deep crypt beneath Sherborne Abbey, their debates echoing off the stone coffins of saints. Other times they convened at a remote hunting lodge in the depths of Cranbourne Chase, the sounds of their deliberations lost among the ancient oaks. The central, unresolved question is their true motivation. Were these men patriots, a secret committee of the realm's best minds, acting to stabilize Wessex during periods of weak or immature kingship? By carefully orchestrating successions and forging secret treaties, they could have prevented civil war and ensured the kingdom's continuity against the ever-present Viking threat. This view paints them as unsung heroes, sacrificing their own recognition for the greater good. Or was this a cabal devoted entirely to personal power? The bishopric of Sherborne controlled vast estates, and the noble families involved held immense wealth. By controlling the king, they controlled the flow of land, titles, and tax revenue. Their secret meetings could have been a way to bypass the public witan, the official council, and carve up the kingdom's riches among themselves, using the crown as their puppet. A third, more intriguing possibility suggests they were adherents of a forgotten political philosophy, perhaps a strain of thought influenced by late Roman ideals of a republic or by Celtic traditions of rule by council. They may have genuinely believed the old Germanic model of a single, powerful warrior king was outdated and dangerous. Their goal would have been to create a veiled oligarchy, a hidden senate that guided the monarch, believing that a collective wisdom was far superior to the will of one fallible man. The Chronicles hint at a bitter internal rift that eventually tore the council apart. One faction, led by a particularly devout bishop, argued for a policy of peaceful integration with the Danish settlers to end the endless cycle of raid and retaliation. Another faction, comprised of hardened military nobles, demanded total war and expulsion. This ideological schism, fought in whispers in the Abbey crypt, may have paralyzed the council at a critical moment, leading to a period of royal weakness they could no longer control. Their ultimate legacy is the ghost in the machine of 10th century Wessex. The sudden, unexplained peace treaties, the surprising appointments of minor nobles to high office, the strange consistency of policy across the reigns of different kings, all these historical quirks find a possible explanation in the silent, determined work of the Shadow Council. They prove that the fate of a kingdom was not always decided in the bright light of the battlefield, but in the dark, quiet spaces where a handful of determined people chose the future. While kings and councils maneuvered for power, the wars they fought demanded a more tangible resource. Silver was the lifeblood of the Saxon state, the metal that paid for armies and forged the coins that bound the economy together. As the Viking raids intensified, the treasury of Wessex began to bleed dry, forcing a desperate search for a legendary source of wealth lost for centuries. Hidden somewhere in the dark, limestone gorges of the Mendip Hills was a mine of fabled richness, a source of silver known to the Romans as Metalla Britannica, but whose precise location vanished with their legions. The kings of Wessex became obsessed with finding it. Royal agents were dispatched to scour the hills, interviewing the oldest local families and offering pardons to outlaws who could lead them to the ancient workings. They were not just looking for a hole in the ground, they were searching for the financial salvation of their kingdom. The clues they followed were frustratingly vague, encoded in the very landscape. A place named Silver Street led only to a sleepy hamlet. A valley called Money Bottom yielded nothing but sheep and thick mud. The local folklore spoke of a hidden entrance, a cave mouth that was only revealed when the setting sun struck a specific rock formation at the autumn equinox. Other tales warned of a guardian spirit, a towering figure of white stone that would block the path of any who came too close. The most chilling stories, however, were not of spirits but of silence. Throughout the Saxon period, men would vanish in the Mendips. A charcoal burner would speak of a new tunnel he had found, only to disappear the next day. A solitary miner would pack his tools, tell his family he was following a dream of a gleaming seam, and never return. The hills seemed to swallow them whole, as if the mine itself was a living thing that guarded its treasure by consuming those who sought it. Modern investigations have brought science to bear on this ancient mystery. Geological surveys confirm that the Mendip Hills are indeed rich in lead ore, and silver is a frequent and valuable byproduct of lead mining. Using advanced sensing technology, researchers have identified several areas with deep, unnatural-looking subsurface voids that do not match known Roman sites. These could be the collapsed shafts and galleries of the lost mine. One particularly compelling theory focuses on a waterlogged valley known as Velvet Bottom. Core samples taken from the peat there show abnormally high levels of heavy metal pollution, consistent with centuries of intensive ore processing. The evidence suggests the Saxons may have been standing right on top of their prize, unaware that the Roman workings were not high on a hillside, but had been deliberately flooded or had collapsed and been buried by landslides, hiding them under a deceptively peaceful meadow. The search continues today, a blend of historical detective work and high-tech prospecting. Enthusiasts cross-reference medieval land grants with geological maps, looking for estates that suddenly became wealthy without any obvious source of income. They study aerial photographs for faint, linear markings in the soil that could indicate old trackways leading to a long-forgotten industrial site. The lost mine of the Mendips is more than a treasure hunt. It represents a critical, missing chapter in the defense of England. Had the kings of Wessex succeeded in their quest, the flood of silver could have financed a larger, better-equipped army, potentially altering the course of the Viking Wars. Its continued absence forces us to wonder if the fate of nations can hinge not just on battles and kings, but on the stubborn secrecy of a single hidden hill. The thunder of the great heathen army is a familiar story, but its silence holds a deeper secret. While the main Viking force clashed with Alfred's armies in the open, a significant contingent simply vanished from the Chronicles. These were not warriors lost in battle, but hundreds of seasoned fighters who detached from the host and disappeared into the Wessex countryside. The official history records only conflict, yet archaeology tells a different tale entirely. Deep in the heart of Alfred's kingdom, settlements have been uncovered that defy the simple narrative of invader versus native. These are not fortified camps, but integrated farmsteads where a Norse-style bronze brooch lies beside a Saxon loom weight. The post holes of a longhouse sit comfortably next to the foundations of a traditional English hall, their inhabitants sharing the same hearth, the same land, and very likely the same fate. This was not a hostile occupation, but a deliberate and peaceful assimilation. How could such a thing happen in the midst of a war for survival? The most compelling theory suggests a secret pact, a desperate and brilliant gamble by Alfred the Great himself. Facing an enemy that seemed limitless, Alfred may have recognized a crucial division within the Viking ranks. This separated contingent might have been led by a pragmatic chieftain, one more interested in land and stability than endless plunder. In the shadows, away from the eyes of his own council, Alfred could have negotiated with them. The terms would have been starkly simple. In exchange for tracts of fertile land and the king's protection, these Norsemen would lay down their arms against Wessex. But Alfred, a master strategist, would have demanded more than just their neutrality. This is where the story turns to whispers of a hidden power. This integrated community, with its intimate knowledge of Viking tactics, language, and loyalties, would have been the perfect instrument for a secret war. Alfred could have used them as an unofficial police force, tasked with monitoring other Norse settlements for signs of rebellion or betrayal. Their presence would be a constant, unsettling reminder to any would-be traitors that the king had eyes and ears even among their own people. More dramatically, they may have formed the core of a specialized military unit, a deniable asset deployed for missions too dark for the royal feared. Imagine a raid led by these allied Vikings, their familiar faces and accents allowing them to approach a rival Danish camp without raising an alarm. They could gather intelligence, sow discord, or eliminate key leaders with a brutal efficiency that Alfred's own soldiers could not match. This controversial chapter redefines our understanding of the kingdom's defense. It suggests that Alfred's victory was not secured by Saxon shields alone, but also by a calculated, secret alliance with his most feared enemies. The echo of the great heathen army, therefore, is not just one of defeat but of transformation. Some of its most formidable warriors may have quietly changed sides, their descendants becoming the very farmers and freemen who would one day swear allegiance to the crown of a united England. A queen's private sorrow is preserved in the faint, fading script of a sacred book. This is the Psalter of the Queen's Sorrow, a stunningly illuminated prayer book commissioned for a royal consort of Wessex. Its pages glow with gold leaf and vibrant pigments, a public display of piety and wealth. But it is the almost invisible marks in the margins, written in a hasty, personal hand, that reveal a heartbreaking story. These are not notes on scripture, but raw expressions of a trapped woman's grief. One line, nearly erased, reads, "I am a songbird in a gilded cage, my wings clipped by duty." Another, pressed so hard the quill scored the parchment, simply asks, "Does he think of me still?" Forensic analysis of these secret writings has provided the first real clues to the Queen's identity. The ink is iron gall, common for the period, but its specific chemical signature matches a batch used in a scriptorium known to serve the court of King Eadwig in the 10th century. Eadwig was a young, controversial king whose short reign was marred by scandal and conflict with the church. His queen was a noblewoman named Aelfjafu, a political match designed to secure an alliance with a powerful northern family. The handwriting itself is the final, damning piece of evidence. When compared to the few surviving examples of Queen Aelfjafu's formal signature on charters, the underlying letter formations and unique slant are a perfect match. The Psalter was hers. The historical context of her life paints a vivid picture of her cage. Aelfjafu was married to Eadwig as a teenager, a transaction to bind two great houses. Her husband, however, was infamous. Chroniclers of the time, particularly the stern churchmen he alienated, wrote that Eadwig was frivolous and neglectful of his kingly duties. He was accused of abandoning his own coronation feast to amuse himself with a noblewoman and her daughter, an act that caused a lasting rift with his own family and the powerful Archbishop Dunstan. For a young queen like Aelfjafu, this public humiliation and emotional neglect would have been a constant, grinding misery. Her role was to produce an heir and be a silent, decorative symbol of unity. Her own happiness was irrelevant to the political calculations that had sealed her fate. The most poignant of the marginal notes point directly to a forbidden love. In the Psalms that speak of longing and deliverance, she wrote a name, or rather, a fragment of one, carefully blurred but still legible under multispectral imaging. It reads, "For Ethel, this could only refer to one man, Eadwig's own brother and rival, Ethelred. The two brothers were locked in a bitter struggle for power, eventually leading to the kingdom being partitioned between them." The notes near this name change in tone. The grief transforms into something more dangerous, a desperate hope. One annotation, written beside a psalm about protection, pleads, "May the Lord shield him from the serpent's envy." The serpent was a common symbol for a treacherous rival, and in her world, the greatest serpent was likely her own husband. She was not merely sad, she was genuinely afraid for her beloved's life and perhaps for her own. This psalter is more than a historical artifact. It is a secret diary hidden in plain sight. Within the very text she was expected to pray from for the success of her husband's reign, Queen Elfjufu was inscribing her loyalty to his enemy and her longing for a different life. The book itself became her only confidant, the silent recipient of truth she could never speak aloud. Her story forces us to see the human cost of political alliances, where a young woman's heart was just another piece to be moved on the chessboard of power. What other private rebellions were etched into the margins of history, waiting for the right light to reveal them? Before the first stone of Wessex was laid, the land was already speaking an older language. Scattered across the downs and river valleys are dozens of smaller, lesser-known stone circles, monuments that whisper of a deep pre-Saxon past. While Stonehenge and Avebury capture the world's attention, these quieter rings hold secrets just as vital to the kingdom's story. The early West Saxons did not see these ancient sites as relics to be demolished. Instead, they appear to have actively maintained them, weaving the old sacred geography into the very fabric of their new Christian identity. Take the Rollright stones on the border of Wessex and Mercia. Local legend says the king and his knights were turned to stone by a witch, a tale that feels like a folk memory of a real confrontation. The Saxons built their own burial mounds directly in sight of the circle, a clear statement of continuity, claiming the power of the place for their own ancestors. Then there is the nine-stone circle in Dorset, nestled in a dark wood. It is aligned not to the sun, but to the rising of the moon at its most extreme northern point, a cycle that takes 18 years to complete. This suggests a sophisticated, long-term lunar calendar, knowledge that the Saxon settlers may have learned from the Britons they lived among. Why would a Christianizing people bother with such places? The answer lies in the land itself. These circles were often built at powerful junctures, atop hidden water sources, or at the convergence of ancient trackways. The emerging kingdom of Wessex was a patchwork of peoples, and by adopting and caring for these universally respected sites, the Saxon kings performed a brilliant act of political and spiritual unification. They were not just building churches, they were sanctifying the entire landscape, baptizing the old ways to serve a new god and a new crown. Ongoing archaeological work is now revealing the physical proof of this maintenance. At the circle known as the Hurlers on Bodmin Moor, excavations have uncovered post holes from wooden structures built between the stones during the 7th century, the very period when the kings of Wessex were consolidating their power. These were not pagan temples, but likely shelters for Christian pilgrims or preachers, a direct co-option of the site's ancient aura. The stones became a stage for a new religion, their immense age lending authority to the new messages spoken within their ring. This fusion of traditions created a uniquely West Saxon form of Christianity, one with deep roots in the soil. It was a faith that understood some places are so inherently powerful that they transcend any single deity, becoming eternal anchors for the human spirit. The true chronicle of Wessex is not just written on parchment, but encoded in these silent circles of stone, waiting for us to learn how to listen. A silent killer stalked the kingdom just as it began to catch its breath. The Great Plague of 897 is a ghost in the historical record, a devastating outbreak that struck a Wessex still reeling from decades of Viking warfare. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, usually so focused on battles and kings, offers only a bleak, sparse entry. It tells of a great mortality among men, a phrase that barely hints at the scale of the suffering in villages and monasteries already stretched to their limit. It is the monastic records, those private journals kept in the stillness of the cloister, that provide the chilling details. The monks wrote of a sickness that began with a raging fever and a profound pain in the joints, so severe that strong men could not rise from their beds. This was followed by a deep lethargy and then, most terrifyingly, by bleeding from the gums and nose. The final stage was a rash described as a purple flower blooming beneath the skin, a sure sign of death's approach. These symptoms are the heart of the mystery. They do not align with the classic signs of the bubonic plague that would ravage Europe later. There were no descriptions of the swollen, blackened lymph nodes known as buboes. This was something different, a forgotten pathogen with its own unique horror. Modern epidemiologists looking back at these accounts have proposed several theories. The most compelling suggests this was not a bacterial plague at all, but a viral hemorrhagic fever, similar in its terrifying progression to diseases like Ebola. The bleeding and the internal damage described are classic hallmarks of such viruses. Another possibility is that it was an exceptionally deadly strain of influenza, one that triggered a catastrophic immune response leading to the hemorrhaging the monks witnessed. This was not the simple flu of a seasonal cold, but a pandemic-level virus that attacked the very walls of the blood vessels. So why has this plague, which clearly devastated a generation, been so completely overshadowed in history? The answer lies in the relentless shadow of the Viking Wars. The chroniclers of the time were focused on the survival of the kingdom itself. A plague, no matter how deadly, was seen as an act of God, a tragedy to be endured. A Viking army, however, was a tangible enemy that could be fought and chronicled as part of the great story of Alfred's legacy. The plague was a silent, faceless catastrophe that killed in beds rather than on battlefields, and in a culture that celebrated heroic deeds, its victims were simply not deemed as worthy of lengthy remembrance. The disease became a footnote in the grand narrative of war. Yet, this forgotten plague may hold the key to understanding a pivotal moment of recovery. The massive depopulation it caused, particularly among the farming class, would have created a severe labor shortage. This could explain the sudden shifts in land ownership and the consolidation of estates seen in records from the early 10th century. The social and economic fabric of Wessex was torn and rewoven by this invisible enemy, shaping the kingdom as surely as any treaty. Today, the truth may finally be within reach. Advances in ancient DNA analysis offer a chance to identify the killer. The remains from burial pits dated to this period, if they can be located and carefully examined, could still retain traces of the pathogen in the teeth and bone. Extracting that genetic code would be like reading a message from the grave, allowing scientists to classify the virus or bacterium once and for all. Solving this 900-year-old medical mystery would do more than just put a name to a disease. It would restore a chapter of human suffering to its proper place in history, honoring the thousands who died not by the sword, but by a silent, creeping shadow that history itself almost forgot. An unknown knight haunts the margins of Wessex's history, his only identifier a wyvern coiled in fury upon his shield. This two-legged dragon, a symbol claimed by no known noble house, appears again and again in fragmented chronicles and Norse sagas, always tied to the most perilous missions of the West Saxon kings. He is not recorded with a name, only with deeds. One saga describes a towering warrior who held a narrow bridge against a score of Danish champions, his wyvern shield reddened by the sunset and by blood. A monastic chronicle, lamenting a king's reliance on a man of obscure birth, refers scornfully to the Draconis Bastardus, the dragon's bastard who carried out the crown's most unsavory command. He was the king's shadow in steel, a weapon to be deployed where royal authority could not be seen to tread. The mystery of his identity is a puzzle of heraldry and absence. Why would a knight of such renown be denied the one thing every warrior craved, a name and a lineage for the songs? The most tantalizing theory paints him as a royal bastard, a son of a king born outside of marriage. His martial prowess would have been a source of pride, but his ambiguous bloodline a political liability. Granting him the official arms of the royal house would have been unthinkable, a threat to the legitimate succession. Instead, he was given a variant, the wyvern, a creature of the same serpentine family but distinct, a symbol of formidable power that was also a constant reminder of his secondary status. He could serve the crown with a sword, but he could never wear it. Another possibility suggests a far more foreign origin. He could have been a mercenary of exceptional skill, perhaps a Frankish knight or even an exiled Norse lord who pledged his sword exclusively to the King of Wessex. As an outsider with no local allegiances, he would have been the perfect agent, utterly dependent on the king's favor and immune to the complex web of Saxon noble rivalries. The wyvern, a creature not common in English symbology at the time, could have been his own personal emblem, granted special permission to be born in the king's service as a mark of unique trust. His anonymity, in this case, was not a mark of shame but of professional discretion, a ghost in the royal employ. Perhaps the most intriguing idea is that the Knight of the Wyvern never existed as a single man at all. He may be a literary composite, a convenient character woven into chronicles by scribes who needed a heroic figure to represent the many unnamed housecarls and loyal warriors who performed extraordinary acts. The wyvern shield could have been a narrative device, a consistent symbol used by different storytellers to tag this archetypal champion, much like a recurring motif in an epic poem. This would explain his impossible longevity, appearing in tales that span the reigns of multiple kings. The truth is likely buried in a forgotten charter or a faded genealogy, a single line that connects a grant of land to a knight who served without a name, but always with a dragon at his side. His legend forces us to ask who really shaped the destiny of kingdoms. Was it only the kings whose names we remember, or was it the faceless, formidable few who did their bidding, their identities sacrificed to the greater story of the crown they served so well? Massive stone walls built by Roman engineers now stood guard over a kingdom that did not yet exist. The great forts of the Saxon shore, like Portchester Castle, were the decaying remnants of a vanished empire, yet their story was far from over. In the twilight of the post-Roman world, these formidable structures did not lie empty. They were occupied, repurposed, and reimagined by the very people whose name the Romans had once given to the coast they were meant to defend. The mystery is not why they were built, but what they became in the hands of the early Saxons. Within Portchester's vast walls, archaeologists have uncovered a surprising truth. The neat grid of a Roman barracks was replaced by a haphazard cluster of timber halls, sunken floor huts, and makeshift forges. This was not a military garrison living in disciplined order. It was a vibrant, almost chaotic community. The artifacts found here tell a story of cultural fusion. A fine, wheel-thrown Roman pottery bowl might lie next to a crudely beautiful, handmade Saxon urn. A delicate bronze fibula of a style popular in Gaul was discovered alongside a bone comb carved with traditional Germanic animal motifs. These forts were not just defensive strongholds, they were crucibles where a new culture was being forged from the broken pieces of the old. One of the most compelling theories suggests they became hubs for a shadow economy. The official Roman trade networks had collapsed, but the demand for luxury goods never disappeared. The thick walls of a shore fort provided the perfect cover for illicit trade. Imagine a Saxon chieftain, his authority now rooted in this ancient Roman stone, negotiating with a Frankish merchant for glassware from the Rhineland or wine from the Mediterranean. These transactions would have bypassed any remaining authorities, creating a new class of wealthy, independent rulers who controlled the gates where wealth entered the land. But perhaps their most strategic repurposing was as the first naval bases of the Saxon kings. The Romans built these forts to counter sea-borne raids, and the new lords of the land understood that same threat and opportunity from the sea. The great protected harbor at Portchester would have been an ideal place to build and shelter a fleet of warships. The high walls offered a secure place to store shipbuilding timber, tar, and sailcloth. The watchtowers provided a panoramic view of the Solent, allowing a nascent kingdom to control the waterways that were its new lifelines and its greatest vulnerability. This means the very infrastructure Rome built to keep the Saxons out ultimately became the foundation of their own maritime power. The ghost of the empire lived on, not in its laws or its legions, but in the stone and strategic genius it left behind, a gift that helped the kingdom of Wessex learn to defend itself. A needle can be as sharp as a sword, and its threads can hold secrets just as damning as any state document. The Bayeux Tapestry, that epic 70-meter-long embroidery, is universally known as the Norman version of the conquest, a triumphant justification of William the Conqueror's claim to the English throne. But look closer from the perspective of the defeated English, and a different story begins to emerge from the linen. The most haunting part of the entire work is its end, or rather, its lack of one. The final panels are damaged, torn, and missing, leaving a void where the conclusion should be. The tapestry as we see it today ends abruptly with the English army fleeing the field at Hastings. But what if the original ending was deliberately destroyed because it showed something the Norman victors did not want remembered? The most compelling theory suggests the lost scenes depicted the fate of the surviving West Saxon nobility. These were not just random soldiers, but the core of the old Wessex elite, men like Edric the Wild, who continued a fierce guerrilla war from the Welsh marshes for years after Hastings. The original tapestry might have shown these men not as broken fugitives, but as leaders organizing a resistance, a silent promise that the fight for England was not over. The political context of the tapestry's creation is a labyrinth of its own. It was almost certainly commissioned by William's half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, but the hands that stitched it were English. Skilled Saxon seamstresses, likely from Canterbury, spent years bending over this linen, weaving the story of their own subjugation. Imagine the quiet conversations in that workshop, the subtle decisions made with every colored thread. This gave them a unique and dangerous opportunity for subversion. They could not change the overall narrative, but they could weave in subtle messages of mourning and defiance. In one famous scene, just after King Harold is killed, the border below the main action fills with naked, contorted bodies. Art historians often dismiss this as a generic depiction of the dead on the battlefield. But seen through English eyes, these are not just corpses. They are the souls of the fallen, the very spirit of a free England being cast into chaos and hell, a silent scream of grief stitched into the decorative fringe. Other details are even more telling. In the scene where a house is burned, the main text labels it simply as a house being set on fire by soldiers, but look at the building itself. Its architectural details are distinctly those of an English-style hall, not a Norman structure. The women and children fleeing the flames are dressed as Saxons. This is not a random act of war. It is a specific, heartbreaking depiction of the harrying of the North, William's brutal campaign of terror against the English population. The seamstresses were bearing witness to a war crime, hiding their testimony in plain sight within a celebratory commission. Even the depiction of Harold Godwinson's death is suspicious. The main panel shows him with an arrow in his eye as the Norman story goes, but look directly before that. The Latin word above Harold's figure reads, Harold rex interfectus isti, Harold the king is killed. The verb interfectus does not mean to fall in battle. It means to be slain, to be murdered. This is a small but powerful linguistic choice, framing his death not as a legitimate act of war, but as an assassination. So what became of the true ending? The most likely explanation is censorship. As William's grip on England tightened, a depiction of ongoing English resistance or even of dignified negotiations between Norman lords and Saxon thegns became politically unacceptable. The final feat of the tapestry, which may have shown the submission of the Wessex nobility or their continued defiance, was simply cut away, a literal cutting of the thread of history. The tapestry, therefore, stands as Wessex's final hidden chronicle. It is a palimpsest of wool and linen, where a story of Norman triumph is stitched over a foundation of English sorrow and secret pride. Every stitch was a choice, and in those choices, the last voices of a lost kingdom whispered their truth, ensuring that even in defeat, their story would not be entirely erased. The most enduring chronicle of Wessex was never written on parchment but spoken on the tongues of millions. Every time you use a simple word like the or, and you are speaking with the ghost of a kingdom. The West Saxon dialect, born in the heart of this realm, did not just contribute to modern English, it became its foundational bedrock. While other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms like Northumbria and Mercia had their own rich linguistic traditions, it was the political and cultural dominance of Wessex, especially under kings like Alfred the Great, that elevated its particular way of speaking to the status of a standard. Alfred's own push to translate important Latin texts into English was not done in just any dialect, but specifically in the language of his court and his people. This was a deliberate act of cultural consolidation, making the West Saxon tongue the language of law, learning, and power. The very administrative machinery of the kingdom embedded its vocabulary into the landscape of daily life. Consider the word shire, a term we still use today for counties. This was a West Saxon word for a division of land, a unit of governance that structured the entire kingdom. The shire reeve, the king's official in charge of a shire, evolved over centuries into the word sheriff, a title still carrying legal authority. When you hear about a borough, you are hearing the echo of a West Saxon burh, one of Alfred's fortified towns that became centers of trade and security. These are not just old words, they are the fossilized bones of a governmental system. The legacy is even more personal in our most commonplace names. The endings ton, ham, and worth that dot the map of England are overwhelmingly West Saxon in origin. Ton meant a farmstead or village, ham a homestead, and worth an enclosed settlement. When you visit a town called Southampton or a village like Chippenham, you are literally reading a signpost left by the settlers of Wessex, a permanent marker of their claim on the land. This linguistic takeover was so complete that it even overwrote our understanding of earlier history. The most famous Anglo-Saxon epic, Beowulf, survives in a West Saxon dialect, even though its story and heroes are from a different, more northern tradition. The scribes of Wessex, in copying and preserving the poem, effectively translated it into their own tongue, ensuring that the voice of a lost kingdom would forever tell the stories of others. So the next time you write a letter, read a street sign, or simply have a conversation, remember that you are not just speaking English. You are speaking the language of Wessex, a living artifact connecting you directly to the hidden chronicles of a kingdom that shaped the very words we use to remember it. These 20 chronicles have revealed a Wessex far richer than any history book could contain. We have journeyed from the lost testament of its first king to the final, defiant stitches in a tapestry of conquest. We have uncovered a kingdom built not just on laws and battles, but on whispered oaths, secret councils, and coded riddles. It was a realm where power flowed through hidden alliances and forbidden ideas, where a king's authority could be challenged by a book or legitimized by a stag. The true story of Wessex is written in these margins, in the silent spaces between the official records. It lives in the ghost fleet resting on the seabed, in the forgotten plague that reshaped its society, and in the quiet rebellion of a queen's pen. These are not just footnotes, they are the very substance of a world where every stone, every word, and every shadow held a secret. History is not a simple story of what we know, but a vast and echoing landscape of what we have yet to discover. We would love to hear which of these hidden chronicles resonated most deeply with you. Was it the lost crown of the Summer King, the Shadow Council of Sherborne, or the merchant's map that hinted at lands unknown? Share your own local legends or thoughts in the comments below, and if you are captivated by history's greatest enigmas, be sure to subscribe for our next journey into the past.